He was 18 years old when he inherited a fight he never knew existed. What he discovered buried on an old ranch wouldn't just change his future, it would rewrite his entire past. Sometimes the greatest gifts are the heaviest burdens. If you've ever felt lost and then suddenly found a purpose you never asked for, I think this story will mean something to you. Stick around, and if it does, consider subscribing, because we tell stories for people who know what it's like to start over. The day I turned 18, the world gave me a cardboard box and a bus ticket. That was it. 2 years in the system, 2 years of counting down the days, and my grand exit felt less like freedom and more like being quietly discarded. The box held everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book Grandma used to read to me, a toothbrush, and a stack of paperwork that proved I, Leo Vance, officially existed and was now my own problem. I stood on the curb outside the gray stone building of the Northgate Youth Residence, the place that had been my holding cell since Grandma died. The morning air was thin and cold, tasting of exhaust fumes and the vague metallic scent of impending snow. Other kids who'd aged out talked about this day like it was a graduation. For me, it felt like a cliff edge. My social worker, a tired woman named Janice with perpetually worried eyes, had given me the bus ticket and a $100 bill. "There's a rooming house downtown that takes new adults," she'd said, not meeting my gaze. "It's not much, but it's a start. Good luck, Leo." Good luck. The words echoed in the hollow space inside my chest. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a ghost, untethered from the only anchor I'd ever known. That anchor was a woman with flour on her hands and a laugh that could make the floorboards hum. My grandma. And the guilt of her last days was a stone I'd been carrying for 2 solid years. It was a weight that made the cardboard box feel feather light in comparison. I remembered the argument, the shattered ceramic of a stupidly expensive vase I'd knocked over. The look on her face. It wasn't anger. It was something I couldn't read then, something that looked like fear. A week later, she had the aneurysm. The doctors said it was sudden, unpredictable. But in the dark, quiet hours at Northgate, I knew the truth. I had broken more than a vase that day. I had broken her heart. I walked to the bus station, my worn boots scuffing against the pavement. The city was a blur of noise and motion, people hurrying to jobs and lives I couldn't imagine having. I had no plan beyond surviving the next 24 hours. Find the rooming house. Don't get robbed. Try to find a dishwashing job. It was a pathetic blueprint for a life, but it was the only one I had. I sat on a hard plastic bench in the terminal, the box between my feet, and watched the departure board flicker. Every destination seemed impossibly far away, impossibly hopeful. My world had shrunk to the size of a one-room existence in a building full of other lost boys. My phone, a cheap burner Janice had given me, buzzed in my pocket. A number I didn't recognize. Probably a wrong number, or Janice calling to add some final, depressing piece of advice. I almost ignored it. For some reason, I answered. "Hello?" My voice was rough, unused. "Am I speaking with Mr. Leo Vance?" the voice on the other end asked. It was a man, his tone formal and dry, like old paper. "Yeah, who's this?" I said, my guard immediately up. In my world, unexpected phone calls were never good news. "My name is Arthur Davies. I am the solicitor for the estate of the late Eleanor Vance." My breath caught in my throat. Eleanor Vance, Grandma. "Her estate?" I managed to say. What estate? She didn't have anything. The memory of debt collector letters and her worried sighs over the kitchen table was still vivid. "That is not entirely accurate, Mr. Vance," he said calmly. "Your grandmother owned a property, a rather significant one, in fact, a ranch in the foothills of the Whisperwind Mountains." The world tilted. The ranch. I hadn't let myself think about the ranch in 2 years. It was a place from another lifetime, a place of summer sun and the smell of hay and the creak of the porch swing. A place I thought was long gone, sold to pay for her medical bills. I don't understand," I stammered. "Your grandmother's will was to be read upon your 18th birthday. That is today. I have been trying to locate you for some time." A cold knot formed in my stomach. A will. What does it say? "It is a complex document, Mr. Vance. It would be best discussed in person. However, there is a matter of some urgency. Your sister Chloe has also been in contact. She is under the impression that the property is hers to dispose of as she sees fit." Chloe, my older sister. She had been 18 when Grandma died, already out of the house for a year, living a life I knew nothing about. She'd shown up at the funeral in a black dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe, cried performatively for an hour, and then disappeared again, leaving me to be swallowed by the system. We hadn't spoken since. "Chloe wants the ranch?" I asked, a bitter taste in my mouth. "She has received a rather substantial offer from a development consortium," Mr. Davies said, his voice dropping slightly. "She is eager to accept. The will, however, stipulates certain conditions that directly involve you." He paused, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "Can you come to my office? It's in Coldwater, the town nearest the ranch. I've sent a car to the bus terminal in your city. It should be arriving shortly." A car? For me? The idea was so foreign, it felt like a prank. "Why?" I asked, the single word carrying the weight of 2 years of abandonment and confusion. "Why me?" "Your grandmother was a very deliberate woman, Leo," he said, his voice softening for the first time, using my first name. "She was very clear in her instructions. It seems she left you not just an inheritance, but a choice. I think you owe it to her, and to yourself, to hear what it is." The call ended. I sat there on the bench, the terminal's chaos fading into a dull roar. The ranch. Grandma hadn't sold it. She'd kept it, and she'd left it tangled up in a fight between me and a sister I barely knew. The stone of guilt in my gut shifted, becoming something heavier, more complex. This wasn't about money. I knew that with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. This was about something else entirely. A black sedan, impossibly clean, pulled up to the curb outside. The driver, a man in a simple dark suit, got out and held up a small sign with my name on it. I picked up my cardboard box, my pathetic little life, and walked out of the bus station and into a future that had just cracked wide open. The journey was a silent, 4-hour glide through a landscape that slowly bled from gray city concrete to the stark white and brown of the countryside. I watched the strip malls and suburbs give way to bare-limbed forests and wide, snow-dusted fields. The car was warm and smelled of leather, a bubble of impossible luxury cutting through the world I knew. I felt like an imposter, a smudge of dirt on a clean window. The driver didn't speak, for which I was grateful. I needed the silence to try and assemble the shattered pieces of my understanding. The ranch. Visions of it came back in flashes. The long gravel driveway. the big red barn with its sagging roof, the wraparound porch where Grandma and I would sit in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains, the smell of pine needles and damp earth. It was the only real home I had ever known. My parents were a faded photograph, a story of a car crash when I was 3. Grandma took me in, raised me on that land. She was the fixed point in my universe. Chloe was a different story. 5 years older, she had always been a whirlwind of discontent. She found the ranch stifling, the quiet suffocating. She craved the city, the noise, the promise of a life that wasn't covered in dust and animal hair. She fought with Grandma constantly, about money, about freedom, about her future. The year she turned 17, she left for good, coming back only for holidays, each visit more strained than the last. She saw the ranch as a dead end. I saw it as the whole world. The guilt I carried about Grandma's death was tangled up with Chloe, too. After she left, I was all Grandma had. I was supposed to be the one who stayed, the one who helped. Instead, in my own selfish teenage way, I had started to push back too. I complained about chores, about the isolation. The argument over the vase had been the culmination of weeks of my own stupid rebellion. I was trying to be Chloe, trying to prove I was my own person, and in doing so, I had hurt the one person who had only ever loved me. And now, Chloe wanted to sell it all, to bulldoze the memories and pave them over for a profit. A hot, unfamiliar anger started to burn in my chest, a tiny flame in the cold emptiness. The car finally turned off the main highway and onto a smaller, winding road. The Whisperwind Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in low-hanging clouds. Then I saw the sign, weathered and faded. Coldwater Pop, 1247. The town was a handful of streets, a collection of brick buildings with faded paint and tired-looking storefronts. It hadn't changed at all. Mr. Davies' office was on the main street, a modest shingle hanging above a dark green door. Arthur Davies, solicitor. The driver pulled over and opened my door. "He's waiting for you, son," he said, his first words of the trip. I grabbed my box and stepped out. The air here was different, clean, sharp, and so cold it felt like a physical slap. It smelled of wood smoke and snow. It smelled like home. I pushed open the green door and stepped inside. The office was warm and quiet, filled with the scent of old books and brewing coffee. A woman at a front desk gave me a small, sympathetic smile and nodded toward a closed door. "Go right in, Leo. They're expecting you." My stomach clenched. I took a deep breath, shifted the box under my arm, and pushed open the door to the lawyer's office. The room was lined with books from floor to ceiling. A large oak desk dominated the space, and behind it sat a man with thinning white hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Arthur Davies. He looked kind, but his eyes were sharp, analytical. And sitting in one of the 2 chairs in front of the desk, dressed in a sharp, tailored pantsuit, was my sister. Chloe turned as I entered, and her perfectly made-up face hardened. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a flicker of annoyance and something else. Appraisal. Like she was sizing up an opponent. "Leo," she said, her voice smooth and cool, "you look, well, the state seems to have agreed with you." The jab landed, subtle and sharp. I didn't say anything, just clutched my box and stood there, feeling like a stray dog that had wandered into a country club. "Please, Leo, have a seat," Mr. Davies said. gesturing to the empty chair beside Chloe. I put my box down carefully on the floor beside me and sat. The leather was cool against my back. I felt swallowed by the chair, by the room. Chloe turned her attention back to the lawyer. "Arthur, can we get on with this? I have a meeting with the developers in 2 hours. We need to have the preliminary sales agreement signed by the end of the day." "All in good time, Chloe," Mr. Davies said patiently. He opened a thick folder on his desk and put on his reading glasses. "As you both know, we are here to discuss the last will and testament of your grandmother, Eleanor Vance. I will dispense with the usual legal formalities and get to the primary bequests." He looked at Chloe. "To you, Chloe, Eleanor left the sum of $25,000 to be paid from her savings account." Chloe's face tightened. "$25,000? That's it? The land is worth over $2 million with the development offer." "I am not finished," Mr. Davies said, holding up a hand. He turned his gaze to me. My heart was pounding against my ribs. "To you, Leo, Eleanor left the remainder of her estate, including the 160-acre property known as Whisperwind Ranch, its farmhouse, all outbuildings, and all contents therein." A ringing started in my ears. The ranch. It was mine. I looked at Chloe. The color had drained from her face, replaced by a mask of pure fury. "What? That's insane. He's a child. He was a ward of the state. I'm the one who secured the offer. I'm the one who can turn that useless dirt pile into something of value." "Your grandmother was very specific," Mr. Davies said, his voice unwavering. "However, the bequest comes with a number of significant and legally binding covenants, which brings us to the most critical part of the document." He carefully turned a page in the folder. "Page 12, he said, almost to himself. He looked up, first at Chloe, then at me, and his gaze was heavy. "This is where things become complicated." "Just read it," Chloe snapped. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. "The bequest of Whisperwind Ranch to my grandson, Leo Vance," he read slowly, "is conditional. It is not a gift, but a custodianship. The property carries a significant private debt, a lien against the title, in the amount of $250,000. The number hung in the air, vast and impossible. $250,000. "A debt?" I whispered. "To whom?" "The will does not specify the creditor," Mr. Davies said. "It is a private loan, not with a bank. The terms are severe. The full amount is due upon the transfer of the title. If the debt cannot be satisfied within 90 days of the reading of this will, ownership of the property transfers directly to the creditor." Chloe let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "So, you're telling me Grandma was in debt to a loan shark? And she left that mess to him? This is perfect." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "The development offer is for $2.4 million. We sell. We pay off this mysterious debt. I take my half of the remainder, and he can have his. It's the only logical solution." "That is not an option," Mr. Davies said quietly. Chloe stared at him. "What do you mean, it's not an option?" The lawyer continued reading from page 12. "Under no circumstances is the land to be sold to the West Mountain Development Consortium or any of its subsidiaries. Should my heir, Leo Vance, attempt to do so, the will is rendered void, and the property immediately forfeits to the creditor." Silence. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Chloe looked like she had been slapped. "She blocked the sale? Why?" That money could have solved everything. I believe the answer to that is also here, Mr. Davies said, his eyes scanning the page. He looked at me. Leo, the will grants you a choice. You can refuse the inheritance. If you do, the ranch forfeits, the debt is transferred to the creditor, and you walk away free and clear. You would receive the $25,000 from the savings account instead, and Chloe would receive nothing. Chloe's head snapped toward me. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Or," Mr. Davies continued, ignoring her, "you can accept the inheritance. You would take ownership of the ranch, and you would also assume the full responsibility of the $250,000 debt. You would have 90 days to find a way to pay it. If you succeed, the ranch is yours, free and clear. If you fail, you lose it all." I couldn't breathe. It was a trap, a choice between nothing and an impossible burden. Sell the land and lose it. Keep the land and lose it. Why would Grandma do this? "This is a punishment," I said, my voice barely audible. "Why would she punish me like this?" "I don't believe it's a punishment, Leo," Mr. Davies said gently. "I believe it's a test. Your grandmother also left something else for you, a key and a letter. She instructed me to give them to you only after you had heard the terms of the will." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, ornate iron key, dark with age, and a thick, sealed envelope. He slid them across the desk toward me. My name was written on the envelope in Grandma's familiar, elegant script. My fingers trembled as I picked them up. The key was heavy, real. The letter felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "The letter will explain more than I ever could," Mr. Davies said. "The key is for a lockbox in the study at the ranch. The choice is yours, Leo. You have until the end of the day to give me your decision. Think carefully." Chloe stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood floor. "This is a joke, a sick, cruel joke. She was a sentimental old fool who would rather the whole place be repossessed by criminals than see it turned into something useful. Fine. Let him have his stupid, impossible choice." She looked down at me, her face a mask of contempt. "Don't come crying to me when you're homeless again in 3 months." And with that, she turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. I was left alone in the quiet room with the old lawyer, a key, a letter, and the weight of an impossible decision. The drive to the ranch was a blur. The driver who had brought me from the city, a man named George, it turned out, drove me the 10 miles out of town without a word. He seemed to understand that I was in a place beyond conversation. I just stared out the window, the key cold in my palm, the thick envelope resting on my lap beside the cardboard box. My mind was a maelstrom of numbers and questions. $250,000, 90 days, a mysterious creditor, a blocked sale. It made no sense. Grandma was the most practical person I knew. She saved string and washed out plastic bags. The idea of her taking on that kind of debt, especially from a private, predatory lender, was unthinkable. Unless she was desperate. The car turned onto the long gravel driveway, and the familiar crunch of tires on stone was a sound that vibrated deep in my bones. The trees lining the drive were skeletal, their bare branches clawing at the gray sky. And then we rounded the final bend, and the house came into view. My breath hitched. It was just as I remembered, yet horribly different. The white paint was peeling, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. A shutter on an upstairs window hung from a single hinge, swaying slightly in the wind. The porch sagged in the middle, and the garden beds were choked with a winter's worth of dead weeds. It looked tired. It looked abandoned. It looked like it was mourning. George pulled the car to a stop near the porch steps. "I can wait if you like," he offered, his voice gruff but kind. "Or I can come back for you." "I'm staying," I said, the words coming out before I'd even consciously thought them. The decision felt less like a choice and more like a simple statement of fact. This was my grandmother's house. Whatever secrets it held, whatever burdens it carried, I couldn't just walk away. "All right, son," he said. He got out, retrieved a few grocery bags from his trunk, and set them on the porch. "Mr. Davies thought you might need some supplies. The power and water are on. He's been paying the bills." He gave me a long, searching look. "Your grandmother was a good woman, Leo. She loved this place. Don't let anyone tell you different." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving me alone in the profound silence of the mountains. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the house. This was the place where I learned to walk, to read, to be a person. And I had left it. I had been taken from it. Now I was back, not as a boy, but as a man with an impossible choice. I walked up the creaking porch steps, my boots echoing in the quiet. The grocery bag sat there, a small offering of civilization in this forgotten place. I ran my hand along the peeling paint of the porch railing. Under a loose stone by the door, right where she always kept it, was the house key. It slid into the lock with a familiar grating sound. The door swung inward with a groan, opening into the darkness of the entryway. The air that rushed out was cold and still, carrying the scent of dust, old wood, and something else, the faint, lingering perfume of my grandmother. It was the smell of memory itself. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, shutting out the gray afternoon. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the dusty windows. Everything was covered in a thin white sheet, ghostly shrouds over the furniture. It was like a tomb, a monument to a life that had suddenly stopped. I put my box and the envelope on a sheet-covered table in the hall and started to walk through the house. I pulled the sheet off the living room sofa, revealing the familiar floral pattern, faded from years of sunlight. I ran my hand over the stone fireplace, its hearth cold and black. In the kitchen, a calendar was still hanging on the wall, turned to the month she died, 2 years ago. Each room was a new wave of grief and memory. I saw her standing at the stove, humming. I saw myself doing homework at the big wooden table. I saw the ghost of a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Finally, I went to the small room at the back of the house that she used as her study. It was more cluttered than the rest of the house, her personality still clinging to the stacks of books on birds and local history, the collection of smooth river stones on the windowsill. And there, on her small, neat desk, was a heavy, dark wood box with an ornate iron lock. The lockbox. I took the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock perfectly. But I didn't turn it. Not yet. First, the letter. My hands were shaking as I sat down in her old desk chair, the leather cracked and cool. I carefully broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the pages within. Her handwriting, so familiar it made my throat ache, filled the page. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am so sorry, my love, that I could not be there to see it. I am sorry for so many things. I know you must be frightened and confused by what Mr. Davies has told you. I know it seems unfair, Let me try to explain. That land, that ranch, it is more than just dirt and wood, Leo. It is your story. It is our story. It started with your great-grandparents who built that house with their own hands. It is soaked in our family's joy and our sorrow. It is the only real thing we have ever had. I know Chloe never understood that. She has a different heart, one that craves the new and the shiny. I do not blame her for it. But you, Leo, you have my heart. You have the heart of the land. You understand what it means to be rooted. I had to stop and take a breath, my eyes burning. I could hear her voice in the words, calm and steady. I continued reading. Now, about the debt. I am so ashamed of it, but I am not ashamed of why I did it. It was for you, Leo. It was all for you. Do you remember the summer you were 16? The trouble with those boys from town? The ones who were always driving too fast, always looking for a fight? I remembered. A group of older, richer kids who saw me as a target, the poor ranch kid. There had been a confrontation, a fight behind the diner in town. One of them, the leader, had fallen badly. He'd hit his head. There were police, an ambulance. His father was a powerful man, a real estate developer. He promised to ruin me, to see me in juvenile detention until I was 21. He said he would make sure my grandmother lost everything for raising such a delinquent. That boy's father, Mr. Sterling, he meant what he said, the letter went on. He was going to destroy you. He wanted to press charges for aggravated assault. He had the money and the influence to make it stick. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let him take you from me and throw you away. So I made a deal. I met with him. He said he would drop everything, make it all go away, for a price. He wanted money, a lot of money, more than I could ever get from a bank, not with the ranch as my only asset and my age. He laughed when I told him I couldn't pay, but then he made another offer. He said he had a business associate who dealt in private financing. He knew I was desperate. My blood ran cold. Sterling, the name of the development consortium Chloe mentioned. West Mountain Development. The lead developer was a man named Thomas Sterling. The man he sent me to was not a good person, Leo. I knew it the moment I met him. But I was trapped. I took the loan, $250,000. I gave the money to Sterling, and he kept his word. The charges were dropped. The whole incident was erased. You were safe. You never even knew how close you came to losing your future. I was supposed to pay the loan back in installments, but the interest was crippling. I was falling behind. I was going to lose the ranch anyway, and the stress of it all. I suppose my body just gave out. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. The vase. The stupid argument. It wasn't about the vase. She was terrified, drowning in a secret debt she had taken on to save me, and I had been yelling at her about chores. The guilt I had carried was real, but I had been guilty of the wrong crime. I hadn't broken her heart with my anger. I had broken it with my ignorance of her sacrifice. I didn't want you to inherit this burden, my love, the letter concluded. I tried to find another way, but time ran out. So I made a different kind of plan, a plan to give you a choice. Sterling and his consortium want our land. They have wanted it for years. It's the key to a larger development they have planned for the whole valley. He created the debt to trap me, and now he means to use it to take the ranch after I'm gone. That's why the will forbids the sale to him. Selling it would be letting him win. It would make my sacrifice meaningless. But I cannot force you to fight this battle. It is too much to ask of anyone. So you can walk away. Take the small amount of money I have left and build a new life. There is no shame in that. I would understand. Or you can stay. You can accept the custodianship of our home, our story. You can fight for it. I do not know how you can win. I have left you a problem with no solution. But I have also left you the ranch. I have left you our home. Inside the lockbox, you will find all the paperwork for the loan. And you will find what little I was able to save. It's not much, but it's a start. Whatever you choose, my darling boy, know that I love you. Know that everything I did to protect you. Be brave, be kind, and do not let them put out your light. Your loving grandma, Eleanor. I sat there in the dusty, silent study for what felt like an hour, the letter clutched in my hand. The entire narrative of my life had been dismantled and reassembled in the space of 10 minutes. I wasn't the cause of her death. I was the cause of her sacrifice. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. She hadn't left me a punishment. She had left me a legacy and the choice of whether or not to claim it. The weight of the last 2 years, the guilt and the grief, seemed to transform. It was no longer a stone sinking me to the bottom. It was a foundation. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve, my hand steady now. I picked up the heavy iron key, my purpose clear and sharp in my mind. I slid it into the lock of the dark wood box and turned. The lock clicked open with a satisfying thud. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a stack of official-looking documents tied with a ribbon, the loan agreement. Beneath it was a small canvas bank bag. I lifted it out. It was heavy. I loosened the drawstring and poured the contents out onto the desk. It was cash. Stacks of 20s and 50s, bound with rubber bands. I counted it slowly, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't even close to what I needed, but it wasn't nothing. It was $17,480. A start, a seed, a flicker of impossible hope. I looked from the money to the predatory loan agreement, and then out the window at the darkening sky over the land my family had called home for generations. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It never had been. I spent a long time just sitting there in the deepening twilight of my grandmother's study. The house was settling around me, groaning softly as the cold of the evening seeped into its old bones. For the first time in 2 years, the silence didn't feel empty or threatening. It felt expectant. I read the loan agreement that had been in the box. The language was dense and legalistic, but the terms were brutally simple. The creditor was a holding company with a generic name, Mountain View Capital. But the address was a P.O. box in the next state. The interest rate was astronomical, and the penalty clauses were designed for one purpose: foreclosure. My grandmother had signed her life away to save mine. The $17,000 on the desk felt both like a fortune and like an insult to the massive debt looming over me. It was the result of 2 years of her scrimping and saving every penny, a testament to her desperate, quiet fight. It was her last stand, and now it was my first. I thought about what Mr. Davies had said, a custodianship. That was the right word. This land wasn't mine to own, not like a car or a television. It was mine to protect. It was a living story, and she had just handed me the pen and asked me to write the next chapter. The alternative, walking away, felt like a betrayal so profound it would hollow me out for the rest of my life. It would mean that her sacrifice was for nothing. It would mean letting Sterling win. It would mean agreeing with Chloe that this place was just a dirt pile. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. The face staring back was thin and pale, the face of a boy who had been living on institutional food and borrowed time. But the eyes were different. It was a fire in them I hadn't seen before. The next morning, I woke up on the old sofa in the living room, a dusty sheet pulled over me as a blanket. The first light of dawn was filtering through the grimy windows, painting the room in pale shades of gray and blue. My body ached from the cold and the unfamiliar softness of the couch, but my mind was clear. I made my way to the kitchen, found a pot, and boiled some water on the old gas stove. I used one of the instant coffee packets George had left. As I sat at the kitchen table, sipping the hot, bitter liquid, I looked out at the land. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, blanketing everything in a pristine, silent white. The sagging roof of the barn, the broken fences, the dead weeds, it was all covered, made beautiful and whole again by the snow. It looked like a promise. It looked like a second chance. I knew what I had to do. After I finished my coffee, I found my burner phone and called Mr. Davies's office. The receptionist answered, her voice warm. "Davies and Associates?" "Hello, it's Leo Vance," I said. "I need to speak with Mr. Davies." "Of course, Leo. I'll put you right through." A moment later, the lawyer's calm voice was on the line. "Leo, I trust you spent a restful night." "I spent a necessary one," I said. "I've made my decision." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear him holding his breath. "I accept," I said, my voice steady and firm. "I accept the inheritance and the debt. The ranch is my responsibility now." There was a long silence. Then Mr. Davies let out a slow, deep breath. It was a sound of profound relief. "I see," he said, and for the first time I heard a genuine smile in his voice. "I had a feeling you might say that. Your grandmother would be very proud." "Pride won't pay the bills, Mr. Davies," I said, the reality of the situation crashing back in. "We have less than 90 days to find nearly $250,000. 89 days, to be precise," he corrected me gently. "And no, pride won't. But purpose might. Purpose is a powerful motivator, Leo. Now listen, the first thing we need to do is formalize your acceptance. I'll draw up the papers. Second, we need to understand our opponent. This Mountain View Capital is almost certainly a shell corporation for Sterling. Proving it will be difficult, but not impossible. A direct link could give us leverage. Third, we need a plan. We need to find a way to raise the capital without selling the land to the one person who is forbidden. "Do you have any ideas?" I asked, feeling a surge of hope. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was an ally. "A few," he said. "The ranch has timber rights, though they haven't been assessed in decades. There are also potential water rights, which are extremely valuable in this part of the state. We could explore conservation easements, or perhaps a different kind of buyer. Someone who wants to preserve the land, not pave it. It won't be easy, and it will be a race against time. The first step is to get the property appraised by someone we trust, not by Sterling's people." "Okay," I said, my mind racing. Timber rights, water rights. It was a new language, but one I was desperate to learn. "What do I do?" "For now, you are the custodian of Whisper Wind Ranch. Take care of it. get to know it again, its strengths, its weaknesses. The answer we need might be written on the land itself. I will be in touch within a day or two with our next steps. And Leo? Yes? Welcome home. After the call, a new energy surged through me. It wasn't just about defiance anymore. It was about creation. I spent the rest of the day working. I started in the house, pulling off all the dusty sheets, shaking them out on the porch, letting the cold, clean air rush through the open windows and doors, chasing out the smell of decay. I found cleaning supplies under the sink and began to scrub. I washed the kitchen counters, the floors, the grime from the windows. It was hard physical work, and my muscles, soft from 2 years of inactivity, screamed in protest. But it felt good. Every bit of dirt I wiped away felt like a small victory. Every clean surface felt like I was reclaiming the space, not just from dust, but from despair. As I worked, the house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home again. The afternoon sun, weak as it was, streamed through the newly cleaned windows, illuminating the familiar rooms in a way that felt warm and alive. I made myself lunch, a sandwich from the supplies George had brought, and ate it at the kitchen table, looking out at the snow-covered fields. That's when the phone rang again. It was Chloe. "I just spoke to Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "He told me what you did. Are you an idiot?" "I made a choice, Chloe," I said calmly, taking a bite of my sandwich. "You made a mistake. You threw away over $1 million. For what? A pile of rotting wood and a mountain of debt? Grandma was a sentimental fool, and you're just like her." "Maybe I am," I said. "This place was her home. It was our home." "It was a prison," she shot back. "I spent 18 years dreaming of escaping it, and you just willingly walked right back into the cage. Sterling will crush you, Leo. He'll take the ranch, and you'll be left with absolutely nothing. I was trying to make sure we both got something out of this mess." "You were trying to make sure you got something," I corrected her. "This was never about us. You just wanted the money." "Of course I wanted the money," she yelled, her voice cracking with a sudden, raw emotion that surprised me. "Do you have any idea what my life has been like? I didn't have Grandma's savings to fall back on. I've been working 2 jobs, living in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates. That money was a lifeline. It was my chance to finally have a life, and you burned it all down for a memory." For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. Her life hadn't been easy either. We were both orphans of a different sort. But her pain didn't give her the right to erase our grandmother's legacy. "I'm sorry, Chloe," I said, and I meant it. "But the answer is no. I'm not selling. Not to Sterling. Not to anyone." There was a cold silence on the other end. "Fine," she said, her voice flat and hard again. "Have it your way. But when you're standing out in the cold in 3 months with nothing but that stupid box of yours, don't call me." She hung up. I put the phone down, the anger and hurt from her words washing over me. But beneath it, my resolve had hardened into steel. She was wrong. I wasn't in a prison. For the first time in my life, I was finally free, because I had something to fight for. The sun was beginning to set, casting long blue shadows across the snow. I pulled on my jacket and boots and walked outside. The air was crisp and still. I walked past the house, past the sagging barn, and up the gentle slope of the hill behind it. From the top, you could see the whole ranch spread out below, all 160 acres of it, nestled in the protective curve of the valley. The mountains stood behind me, silent and ancient. This was what she had fought to protect. This was what she had entrusted to me. The task ahead was monumental, the odds impossible. But standing there, with the cold wind on my face and the deed to this land metaphorically in my pocket, I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of hard work and anxious waiting. Each morning I was up before the sun, my breath pluming in the cold air of the house. I focused on the immediate, the tangible. I repaired the broken shutter, nailing it back into place. I cleared the deadfall from around the house and stacked it for firewood. I shoveled a clear path to the barn and spent an entire day just organizing the chaos inside, sorting through old tools, rusty equipment, and stacks of dry, fragrant hay that was probably as old as I was. Every task, no matter how small, felt like an act of defiance. I was pushing back against the decay, against the narrative of failure that Chloe and Sterling had already written for me. The physical labor was transformative. My hands, once soft, became calloused and capable. The ache in my muscles was a constant, welcome reminder of my purpose. I was pouring my grief, my anger, and my fragile hope into the land, and in return, the land was giving me strength. Mr. Davies called every few days with updates. He had hired a private investigator to dig into Mountain View Capital. He had also contacted a retired forestry expert and a water rights specialist to come and assess the property. "These things take time, Leo," he'd say, "and money. The appraisals won't be cheap." "Use the money from Grandma's savings," I told him, referring to the $25,000 Chloe had forfeited. "That's what it's for." One afternoon, a week after I'd arrived, an old pickup truck rumbled up the driveway. An elderly man with a deeply lined face and a worn-out cowboy hat got out. He looked the house over, then me. "You must be Eleanor's boy," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Leo," I said, extending a hand. He took it in a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Hank Bishop. Lived on the next ridge over for 60 years. Knew your grandma since she was a girl." "It's good to meet you, sir," I said. "Heard you were back," Hank said, nodding. "Heard you were trying to hold on to the place. That's a fool's errand, son." My heart sank. Another person to tell me I was crazy. "Maybe," I said, my jaw tightening. "But I'm trying." He stared at me for a long moment, his pale blue eyes seeming to look right through me. Then a slow smile cracked his weathered face. "That's what your grandma would have said. She was the most stubborn woman in this valley." "Good. A man needs a fool's errand to keep him honest." He gestured to the back of his truck. "Got an old generator in here. Works better than the one I see peeking out of your barn. Your power lines are the first to go down in a storm. You'll need it. Also brought you some venison stew my wife made. You're too skinny." I was speechless. I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Don't say nothing," he grunted, unloading the heavy generator with an ease that belied his age. "Just keep fighting. A lot of us around here don't want to see Sterling's playground of mini-mansions ruining this valley. Eleanor was holding the line. Now it's your turn. If you need a hand, you know where I live." He tipped his hat, got back in his truck, and rumbled away, leaving me with a working generator, a warm meal, and a profound sense of not being entirely alone in this fight. The arrival of the experts a week later was a turning point. The forester, a woman named Ms. Albright, spent 2 days walking the property, taking core samples from trees, making notes on a digital tablet. The water specialist, Mr. Chen, hiked up to the springs in the high country, measuring flow rates and testing purity. I followed them, listening and learning. They spoke a language of bored feet, of watershed health, of riparian zones. They saw the ranch not as a single entity, but as a complex ecosystem of assets. Their presence made the abstract possibilities Mr. Davies had mentioned feel real. While they worked, I continued my own exploration. In the back of the barn, under a dusty tarp, I found my grandfather's old workshop. His tools hung on the wall, outlined in paint, each in its proper place. My grandfather had died when I was 10, but I remembered him in this space, smelling of sawdust and oil, his big hands gently showing me how to hold a hammer. On a high shelf, I found a series of leather-bound journals. They were his. I took them back to the house that night and began to read. They weren't diaries of feelings, but logs, detailed records of the ranch going back 30 years. He'd noted rainfall, crop yields, timber harvests from a small, managed plot, repairs to the house, the birth and death of every animal. But one section caught my eye. He wrote extensively about the High Meadow Spring. He'd had the water tested yearly. "Purest water in the county," he wrote. "Cold and clean. Eleanor calls it diamond water." He had even drawn detailed maps of the geology, speculating that the spring was part of a much larger, untapped aquifer. It was a footnote in a dead man's journal, but it felt like a flare in the dark. The next day, Mr. Chen, the water specialist, came down from the high country, his face lit with excitement. "Mr. Vance," he said, "you have something remarkable up there. The spring your grandfather wrote about. It's more than a spring. It's the primary outlet of a significant artesian aquifer. The water is exceptionally pure, high in minerals. It's gourmet, for lack of a better word." He showed me his data. The flow rate was consistent, even in dry seasons. The quality was off the charts. "Companies spend millions trying to find a water source like this," he explained. "Boutique bottling companies, breweries, specialty beverage makers. This is a license to print money, if you can find the right partner." Hope, fierce and bright, surged through me. This was it. This could be the answer. I immediately called Mr. Davies. "We have it," I said, my voice shaking with excitement. "The water. There's a commercial-grade aquifer on the property." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Leo, are you certain?" "The specialist is here. He says it's the real deal." "This could be it," Mr. Davies said, a rare excitement in his voice. "This changes the game. Sterling's offer was for the land, for development. He might not even know about the aquifer's true value. This gives us an alternative, a way to generate income without selling the soil." The path forward was suddenly clear. We didn't have to sell the ranch. We could sell the water. We could partner with a company that valued sustainability, that would protect the land while bottling its most precious resource. We could pay the debt and create a future for the ranch, a future my grandmother would have been proud of. But as I stood there, phone in hand, watching the sun glint off the distant snow-covered peak where the spring was born, a cold thought intruded. If the water was this valuable, was it possible Sterling didn't know? Or was it the one thing he wanted all along? The 90-day clock was still ticking. We had found a weapon, but the battle was far from over. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mr. Davies, galvanized by the discovery of the aquifer, moved with a speed that was dazzling. He engaged a firm specializing in environmental resource brokering. They analyzed Mr. Chen's data and confirmed his assessment. The Diamond Water Aquifer was a significant commercial asset. They began discreetly reaching out to a curated list of potential partners: high-end bottled water companies, craft breweries, and even a natural cosmetics company looking for a pure water source. The goal was not to find the highest bidder, but the right partner, one who would agree to a long-term lease with strict conservation and land use covenants. We weren't just selling a resource, we were selling a story. The story of a family's legacy, of land preserved for generations. While Mr. Davies handled the complex legal and business side, my job was on the ground. I worked with Ms. Albright, the forester, to mark out a sustainable timber harvesting plan for a small section of the forest, far from the watershed. The sale of that timber, while not enough to solve the main problem, brought in a crucial $30,000, which we used to pay the mounting legal and appraisal fees and to make some essential repairs on the house and barn. Hank Bishop, my neighbor, proved to be an invaluable ally. He introduced me to other local ranchers and farmers, men and women who had known my grandmother for decades. When they heard I was fighting to save the ranch from Sterling, they offered their help. One brought over a tractor and helped me clear a fire break around the property. Another, a retired carpenter, spent a weekend with me reinforcing the sagging porch. They brought food, they offered advice, they shared stories about my grandmother, painting a picture of a woman who was a pillar of their community. I learned she had organized a co-op to help local artisans sell their wares in the city. I learned she had fought against a proposed quarry a decade ago and won. Her fight against Sterling wasn't just about her land, it was about protecting the entire valley. I wasn't just defending a piece of property, I was taking up my grandmother's post as a guardian of this place and its people. But the shadow of the deadline loomed. We had less than a month left. Sterling, it seemed, was playing a waiting game. There were no more calls from Chloe, no direct threats. Just a heavy, watchful silence. We knew he was waiting for the clock to run out, for us to fail, so he could swoop in and claim the prize from his proxy creditor. The pressure was immense. Every night I would sit with my grandfather's journals, studying his maps, reading his notes, feeling the weight of the generations who had walked this land before me. One night, a potential partner came to visit. He was the CEO of a family-owned spring water company from Oregon, a man named Elias Vance, no relation, a coincidence that made us both smile. He was a quiet, thoughtful man, with a genuine passion for his business. I walked him up to the high meadow spring myself. We stood there as the sun began to set, the air crisp and cold. He cupped his hands and drank directly from the source. He closed his eyes, savoring it. "Your grandfather was right," he said softly. "This is diamond water." We spent the evening in the warm kitchen of the farmhouse, drinking coffee and talking. I told him the whole story, about my grandmother, the debt, the fight against Sterling. He listened patiently, nodding, his eyes never leaving mine. "My company was started by my grandfather, much like this ranch was started by yours," he said. "We've had to fight off takeovers from massive beverage conglomerates for years. I understand what it means to protect a legacy." He made an offer that night. It wasn't a sale of the land, but a 100-year lease on the water rights. He would build a small, state-of-the-art, low-impact bottling facility near the spring. The ranch would receive a significant upfront payment, more than enough to clear the debt, and a percentage of the gross sales in perpetuity. The contract would include the strictest environmental protections in the industry. The land would remain mine. The ranch would be safe. It was everything I could have hoped for. The next morning I called Mr. Davies and told him to accept the offer and draw up the contracts. The relief was so overwhelming, it almost brought me to my knees. We had done it. We had found a way. The day the contracts were to be signed, Mr. Davies and I met Elias Vance in the Coldwater office. The 90-day clock had only 4 days left on it. We were cutting it close. As we sat around the big oak table, the final documents spread out before us, the door to the office opened. Thomas Sterling stood there. He was older than I remembered from that day at the diner, his face puffier, his hair thinner, but the same arrogant sneer was firmly in place. Behind him stood my sister, Chloe. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. "I don't believe you were invited," Mr. Davies said, his voice dangerously calm. "I heard there was a party," Sterling said, strolling into the room as if he owned it. "Didn't want to miss the fun, especially since it involves my property." "This property is not yours," I said, standing up. "Not yet, maybe," Sterling chuckled. "But the clock is ticking, and I've come to make a final offer, a better one." He looked at Elias Vance. "Whatever he's offering you for the water, I'll double it. Cash, today." Elias Vance looked at Sterling with cool disinterest. "My company doesn't do business with men like you." Sterling's smile faltered for a second. He turned his attention to me. "All right, kid, let's cut the crap. You've been a thorn in my side, I'll give you that. You and that sentimental old woman. But this is the end game. I am going to own that valley. I will get that land. Your little water deal is cute, but it's not going to happen." "The contracts are right here," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "We have a deal." "You have a piece of paper," Sterling shot back. "I have your sister." He gestured to Chloe. "She's decided to become a more active participant in her grandmother's estate. She has filed a legal challenge to the will. She's contesting your custodianship, claiming you're not mentally competent to manage the estate, citing your time in the state system. She's requesting a full psychiatric evaluation." My blood ran cold. "That's insane. It'll never hold up." "It doesn't have to," Sterling said with a vicious grin. "It just has to delay things. It will tie this whole deal up in court for months, maybe years, long past your 90-day deadline. Your contract with Mr. Vance here will expire, and the ranch will default to my associate. I win." He had thought of everything. He had found my one remaining vulnerability, my sister. I looked at Chloe, who refused to meet my eyes. She was his weapon, a tool to be used and discarded. "Why, Chloe?" I asked, my voice breaking. "After everything, why would you help him?" She finally looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a desperate, bleak emptiness. "He offered me a way out, Leo," she whispered. "He paid off my debts. He gave me an apartment. He promised me a piece of the final sale. What did you ever offer me? A shack and a bunch of memories I never wanted." Sterling put a hand on her shoulder. "So here's my final offer, Leo. Drop the water deal. Drop the fight. Sign the ranch over to me. I'll forgive the debt. And I'll give you a clean, simple check for $500,000. You can walk away, go anywhere you want, start a new life. No more fighting." It was the ultimate temptation. An easy way out. More money than I could imagine. An end to the struggle. All I had to do was surrender. All I had to do was betray my grandmother, my home, and myself. I looked at Sterling's smug face, at Chloe's broken one, at Mr. Davies's worried expression, and at Elias Vance, who was watching me with quiet intensity. I thought of my grandmother's letter. Be brave, be kind, and do not let them put out your light." I took a deep breath. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the entire room. Sterling's smile vanished. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "The ranch is not for sale, not for any price." Sterling's face turned purple with rage. "You foolish little brat. You're throwing it all away. You will have nothing." "I already have everything I need," I said. And in that moment, I knew it was true. I had a home. I had a purpose. I had a community. That was a different kind of wealth, a kind he could never understand. I turned to Chloe, my heart aching for her. "I'm sorry you made this choice, Chloe. I really am." I then looked at Mr. Davies. "Is his challenge legal?" "It's frivolous and malicious," Mr. Davies said, a grim smile on his face. "But yes, it will cause a delay." "But," Elias Vance spoke up, his calm voice cutting through the tension, "my offer is not contingent on your deadline, Leo. We have a signed letter of intent. My company will happily fund the legal battle against this frivolous claim. We've dealt with corporate raiders like Mr. Sterling before. We know how to fight them. We'll tie him up in court." The color drained from Sterling's face. He had overplayed his hand. He had assumed my ally was just another businessman who would cut and run at the first sign of trouble. He hadn't counted on a man of principle. "This isn't over," Sterling hissed, grabbing Chloe's arm and pulling her toward the door. "Get out of my office," Mr. Davies said, his voice like flint. Sterling stormed out, dragging a stunned-looking Chloe with him. The door slammed shut, leaving us in a sudden, ringing silence. We had won. The battle wasn't over, but the war had turned. We had held the line. The months that followed were not easy. Sterling, true to his word, fought us at every turn. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to drown us in paperwork and legal fees. But Elias Vance was also true to his word. His legal team was relentless, batting away every frivolous claim. Chloe's challenge was dismissed by a judge who called it an abuse of the legal process. She disappeared after that. I heard from Mr. Davies that Sterling had cut her off completely. I tried to reach out to her once, but the number was disconnected. I hoped one day she would find her way back to something real. While the lawyers battled, I worked. With the initial payment from the lease agreement, I paid off my grandmother's predatory loan in full. The feeling of handing that check to Mr. Davies, of finally severing that cord of fear, was one of the most profound moments of my life. With the remaining funds, I began to bring the ranch back to life. I hired a local crew, led by Hank's son, to put a new roof on the house and the barn. We repaired fences, tilled the old garden beds, and painted the farmhouse a gleaming white, just as it had been when I was a small boy. The bottling facility was built with incredible care, nestled into the landscape so discreetly you could barely see it from the house. It provided good jobs for people in the valley, and the first bottles of diamond water from Whisper Wind Ranch hit the shelves that fall. They sold out in a week. The ranch was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. It was a living, breathing entity, a hub of the community my grandmother had so loved. The house, once silent and cold, was now often filled with the warmth of friends and neighbors. I had found my family, not in blood, but in shared purpose and mutual respect. One evening, about a year after that day in the lawyer's office, I was sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air was cool and smelled of freshly cut hay. The ranch was quiet, but it was a peaceful, contented quiet. I had my grandfather's journal in my lap, but I was just looking out at the land, my land. I had learned so much in that year. I had learned about forestry and water rights, about legal contracts and business plans. But the most important lessons weren't about money or resources. I learned that home isn't a place you are given, it's a place you choose to care for. It's a responsibility you accept. I learned that the heaviest burdens can sometimes be the most meaningful gifts, because they give you a reason to be strong. And I learned that my grandmother's love wasn't something I had lost. It was something I had been tasked with carrying forward. Her sacrifice hadn't ended with her death. It had just begun with my choice. She had given me a broken, indebted, beautiful piece of the world, and in learning to fix it, I had somehow managed to fix myself. The quiet boy who left the group home with a cardboard box was gone. In his place was a man who knew the weight of his own name and the value of his own story. So, here I am, and maybe my story resonates with you. Maybe you've also been handed a situation that felt impossible. Maybe you've had to make a choice between what is easy and what is right. Maybe you're still carrying a burden from your past, a secret sacrifice someone made for you that you're just now beginning to understand. If this story found you today, I want you to know something. You're not alone in that fight. These choices, these burdens, they don't have to be endings. They can be beginnings. They can be the very thing that shows you who you are meant to be. The world is full of people telling you to sell out, to take the easy money, to let go of the things that are hard. But sometimes, holding on is the only thing that makes sense. Sometimes, the fight is the prize. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here for people who aren't afraid of the hard stories, because we know that's where the real truth is. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about a time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. I read every comment, and I believe, just like my grandmother did, that every story matters. Thank you for being here. Keep fighting your fight.